Hello, darlings. The Doctor is a fashion icon. I mean, I started wearing Converse back in 2006 because of the 10th Doctor, and I have owned a pair ever since. I once wore a tweed jacket, bow tie, and fez to school for a non-uniform day. Yes, I was mildly bullied at school. But honestly, the fashion choices made by our favourite eccentric Time Lord gave me the confidence to try out new looks, to wear things that weren't just t-shirts and jeans, and it's one of the reasons that I got into vintage clothing as well. So what I want to do today is look at the costume design for each of the Doctor's outfits, looking at the thought process behind them and what they were influenced by and who brought what ideas to the table. Obviously, as all things with Doctor Who, the history of the programme is a very long one, so I'm just going to be focusing on the Doctor's outfits. Obviously, as well, each incarnation has a couple of different variations in their outfits, and I probably won't mention every single one, but I'll try and cover the main points. Also, I apologise if I mislabel any clothing items. I can sew, I do have an interest in fashion, and I have done research, but I'm not a fashion expert, so apologies if I call something by the wrong name. So, let's once again begin our timeline in 1963. The First Doctor. For the first ever recorded episode, the First Doctor is wearing a cape, a scarf, an astrakhan hat, and a contemporary 1960s suit. This episode is usually referred to as the pilot episode, which isn't technically accurate as pilots didn't exist in 1960s British TV. This episode is essentially the first version of An Unearthly Child, which creator Sidney Newman wasn't happy with, and so the episode was reshot, with one of the changes made to it being the costumes worn by the Doctor and Susan. In the version that aired, the Doctor retains his cape, hat and scarf, but the modern suit is replaced with an Edwardian design. He's also wearing a black frock coat, a tweed waistcoat, a wing-collared shirt with a ribbon tie, and tartan trousers. I was really excited going into this because I thought I'd be able to find out loads of information on who designed this, why they chose it, what they were trying to say about the character. No. So back in the 1960s, the way costume design worked was a bit different to the way it works nowadays. The people who were credited with costumes worked for the BBC costume department rather than specifically working with the Doctor Who production officers. I say credited, but really there was no on-screen credit for costume designers until the 1970s. Costume designers would then be assigned to individual serials without having much say in the matter. So someone who has a lot of experience making contemporary costumes for a soap might suddenly be shifted over to making spacesuits for Doctor Who. And this meant that all the different design departments weren't working as closely together as they would be nowadays. With there not being a specific head of costume design for Doctor Who, and with designers not really documenting their ideas in a way that a lot of them would today, there's just not really a lot of information on costume design from that era. Although the most frequently credited costume designer for the first 4 seasons of Doctor Who was Daphne Dare, the designer for the unaired pilot and An Unearthly Child was actually Maureen Hennigan. Maureen was the daughter of an actress and actually worked in costume design for the RSC for a time before moving over to the BBC. In an interview with Gillian Drummond, she says, "William Hartnell was not an easy man to work with. He was an angry actor, not simpatico, and he had definite ideas of what he wanted the Doctor to look like. I was stuck in the middle and told to please both of them." By both of them, I believe she's referring to Hartnell and to the show's director, which would have been Waris Hussain. She goes on to say, "You have to make sure the actor wants to act in the costume. It's really important they want to wear it. You have to go to their inner thoughts somehow, and you learn never to say no to an actor." Which I think definitely makes sense for a character like the Doctor, but also doesn't particularly reflect my own experience with costuming. With Hartnell having a bald head that would reflect the studio lights, Hennigan had to come up with a solution, so they decided on a wig and a hat. Apparently Hartnell had wanted a cloth cap, but she suggested something more exotic, and so she went shopping in London and came back with 6 astrakhan hats in various shades of black, which Hartnell really liked. For the main costume, which was rented from a theatrical clothing company called Nathan's, Hennigan wanted something related to the 20th century but not too far away from it, so I thought, why not go to the 19th century? The streetwear at the time was Edwardian-ish. I find it interesting that she mentioned streetwear because I'd never really thought about the connection between the First Doctor's clothing and the mod fashion movement. The precursors to the mod movement, the teddy boys of the 1950s, had more obvious Edwardian inspirations in their clothing choices, and I find it interesting that Hennigan took inspiration from a group that was typically looked down upon by mainstream conservative society. The Doctor was also given a waistcoat as he had to have fobs and a chain and a pocket watch. It was part of the script, so we gave him a waistcoat. Then he had to have a muffler, neck scarf, because all travellers seem to wear mufflers. So they added the scarf to indicate that he was someone who travelled a lot, which is maybe something that a modern audience wouldn't necessarily pick up on, but I assume the connection was more easily made with 1960s viewers. The First Doctor also wears a blue signet ring, which has some vaguely defined powers. I'm not sure if it was included in the costume design, with the intention of it being a mysterious alien ring, or whether the inclusion of its powers came after the costuming decision. Clayton Hickman also pointed out on Twitter that for a photo shoot on the 20th of September 1963, Hartnell is wearing the costume that we would all recognise as being the First Doctor's outfit. However, when the pilot was filmed a week later, he's wearing the 60s suit. So it's unclear what series of decisions was made for him to be wearing the suit in the pilot when they'd sort of supposedly already come up with the Edwardian-inspired idea. The Second Doctor. Patrick Troughton began his tenure as the Doctor in 1966. It's unclear if the Doctor's outfit changes when he regenerates from his first body to his second, as the footage no longer exists. We do know that the First Doctor's ring falls off his hand, similar to 12's ring falling off when he regenerates into 13. And I think he picks his jacket and hat out from a chest in the TARDIS, but otherwise he's already wearing his new costume. His outfit is quite similar to the First Doctor's, so it's possible that the implication is that it's the same outfit, just on a different body, and a little bit rattier because of the renewal process. But realistically, no one had really ironed out exactly what regeneration was at this point, so it makes sense that there's some inconsistencies there. Alexandra Tynan, who shared a office with previous costume designer Daphne Dare, was responsible for costuming the 10th Planet and the Power of the Daleks, though she is credited as Sandra Reed during her time on the programme. She remembers that there was first a conversation between head of drama Sydney Newman and producer Innes Lloyd, and that they wanted a cosmic hobo look for the Second Doctor, and so they wanted her to source clothes that were well worn or second-hand. Some sources indicate that director Derek Martinus, script editor Jerry Davies, and Patrick Troughton were also involved in the initial conversations around the outfit. Tynan remembers collecting a few different outfits, taking them down to a basement in the BBC, and having Troughton try on a couple of different possible costuming choices. So nothing was made for him, instead everything was secondhand. They wanted to keep some echoes of the First Doctor, and by the end of the afternoon they decided on a costume and had some ideas of what they wanted to add to it. Tynan remembers it was a fairly painless exercise and an enjoyable one. Patrick was great fun, of course, and he had his input. It was very important, as it is with all actors, that they let you know how they're thinking the character should be too. The Second Doctor's frock coat was several sizes too big for him, and his trousers were comically baggy. He ditched the ribbon tie for a jaunty dicky bow and left the top button of his shirt undone. In his first adventure, he donned a large stovepipe hat, though it didn't last very long. People have speculated whether Troughton wore a wig in the role, though various cast members have denied this and said that it was very much his real hair. Annette Wills said of filming Power of the Daleks, "We had 2 weeks of rehearsals, so Patrick had extra time to get into the role. He put on his Harpo Max curly wig, and Michael Craze said, 'If you're going to wear that, I'm not bloody working with you,' and went off for a smoke. I was worried we were wasting time, so I took a comb out of someone's pocket and combed his hair forward in a Beatles style and messed it up a bit. There was silence as Patrick looked in the mirror, and then he said, 'I like it.'" Some people have taken that to say that she combed the wig to make it more Beatlesy, but I do think she's referring to Troughton's actual hair there. Patrick Troughton also recalled this event at a convention in 1986, saying that they took the wig off and had to come up with another hairstyle a few hours before filming. It's interesting that there was originally a curly wig incorporated into the costume, and I think making the change back to his real hair was definitely the right decision. I don't think audiences would have appreciated such a drastic visual change from Hartnell's white-haired grandfather to a clownish curly mop of hair. They could save that one for the 80s. This Doctor also had a cloak and a large fur coat that he would wear in cold weather. I love the oversized fur coat. It's quirky enough to really suit the character, and it was probably also great to wear when they were filming in cold conditions. I'm not sure whose idea it was for the Doctor to wear this, but Martin Bao is credited with the costumes for the Abominable Snowmen, so I assume he at least sourced it. The design of this Doctor also has echoes of 1960s counterculture. Like we mentioned earlier, his hair is similar in style to the Beatles, who were obviously incredibly popular with the still very newly labelled idea of teenagers. The outfit of the second Doctor should be upper class or a very well-respected way of dressing, but the scruffy vibe of his costume almost makes a mockery of the establishment. Again, very evocative of the Teddy Boys of the 1950s, with perhaps a bit of a hippie-ish vibe mixed in there. The Third Doctor. Welcome to the 1970s. The Third Doctor collapsed out of the TARDIS and onto our screens in 1970, soon stealing his new look from a hospital, something that future incarnations would make a habit of. The clothes that the Doctor chose consisted of a white frilled shirt, a blue velvet suit jacket, black trousers, black dress shoes, a black cravat, and a black Inverness cape with a red lining. Inverness capes were most popular during the Victorian era and are most famously associated with Sherlock Holmes, even though Holmes is described as wearing an Ulster cape by Conan Doyle. The initial idea for the Third Doctor's outfit was supposedly inspired by a 1969 Radio Times photo call, to which John Pertwee brought a suitably eccentric outfit from his family wardrobe, which he thought was something the Doctor might wear. Producer Barry Letts was impressed with this look and used it as inspiration for the Doctor's outfit. I did find a photo call from around that time, but it's from when they were filming Spearhead in Space, so Pertwee is already in costume for it. So it's possible that the images from the photo call being referred to no longer exist or just haven't re-emerged yet. Costume designer Christine Rawlins said in the Who's Round podcast that she had no memory of John Pertwee bringing his own clothes, but that could have been because it was just the producer who saw it, or because she had just forgotten. She did say, though, that Pertwee had a strong idea of what he wanted to wear, and that either the cape or the dinner jacket were his idea. But the outfit was eventually put together with ideas from Pertwee, Rawlins, and the tailor that they were working with. Rawlins has also said that she took inspiration from the BBC show Adam Adamant Lives, and you can definitely see the similarities between the silhouettes of the two characters, though the Doctor's outfit has more 70s influences in its design. Another designer, Barbara Lane, has also claimed to have some influence in the design. She said, "John Pertwee came up with his own designs originally, but I wanted him to look a little trendier, so I designed him a rather smart smoking jacket and a tweed cloak, but still cut on Victorian lines." Apparently at the time it's quite fashionable to be wearing a velvet dinner jacket, so Pertwee has this eccentric mix of fashionable yet flamboyant going on in his design. Rawlins also said that he found the cloak quite impractical, particularly when driving Bessie. John Pertwee's shirts for the 1970 series were made by Michael Fish, who made garments for people like Mick Jagger and David Bowie, so this Doctor is certainly very fashion forward. It's worth noting that this was also the first Doctor to have their adventures broadcast in colour, so making the Doctor's outfit something that would be exciting for viewers with newfangled colour TVs, as well as still interesting for those watching in black and white, was an important element in the formation of the outfit. In 1971, the costume had a redesign by Ken True, this time with a red jacket with a purple lining. And in the final 2 seasons of Pertwee's run, the same silhouette was kept for the outfit, with the colour scheme changing in between stories. The Third Doctor is clearly a bit of a fashionista, as he has a lot of different looks going on, but the costume is kept consistently recognisable as his outfit. This Doctor was often described as a dandy for his out-there clothing choices. In the early 70s, James Bond was the male action hero of the time, and you can definitely see influences of that in the Doctor's costume. Whilst Bond might not have been wearing something quite as loud as the Third Doctor, the velvet smoking jacket is definitely reminiscent of Bond's fashionable suits. Side note, John Pertwee served in naval intelligence in the Second World War alongside James Bond author Ian Fleming. Fleming once called Pertwee a blithering idiot for messing up an interview for a job that he didn't want to do. The dandy trope was also semi-common in 1970s science fiction, with characters such as Jason King and Jerry Cornelius falling into it. So it wasn't necessarily a subversive choice for the Doctor to be dressed this way, but the idea of a dandy is often linked back to people like Oscar Wilde and Lord Byron, both queer men, which, if you've watched my Queer History of Doctor Who video, is yet another link back between Doctor Who and queer culture. This Doctor also wore a ring on his little finger. This was John Pertwee's own ring. When asked what his most treasured possession was in an interview with Doctor Who magazine, he said, "I should think probably this ring. The coin that you can see on it shows Athene, the owl goddess of wisdom. A Roman sailor came across this coin. Obviously somebody from Greece had come to Rome and used this coin, and he thought, that's nice, I'm going to have it made into a ring. And then he took it to sea with him and kept it in a little pot. In about 1958, I was diving and found this wreck, pulled up all the amphora. We also found the stock of an anchor, so we were able to see what the boat was, and date it to about 55 AD from the insignia on the side. And in one of the pots, I found this ring from the poor bloody sailor who had obviously drowned. I gave it to a man called Silver Douglas, a jeweller, who did it up for me to make it fit my little finger, and it's been there ever since. You can probably see it in a lot of the Doctor Who photos." His son, Sean, now owns the ring, and according to him, his dad had so many stories, and every time he would tell a story, one tiny fact would change, so you would always be fascinated. So who knows if that's the exact true story of how we found that ring, but I imagine it's at least partly true. One noticeable thing about the Third Doctor that sets him apart from the others is that he has a tattoo. This was not a choice by the costume department, instead it was a relic from Pertwee's time in the Navy. According to his autobiography, Moon Boots and Dinner Suits, he celebrated his birthday with his Navy friends, got blackout drunk, and woke up with his arm wrapped in toilet paper. I'd been tattooed. A green and scarlet cobra was squirming itself into a question mark on my forearm. God knows where or by whom this work of art was done, but whoever it was had executed quite a fair job, and it doesn't seem to have upset too many people over the years. This tattoo was later retconned to be a convict tattoo placed there by the Time Lords during the Doctor's exile on Earth. It is convenient that the tattoo is the shape of a question mark. People think that the Fourth Doctor was the first one to wear the question marks, but I'm arguing that it was the third. The tattoo also contrasts well with the dandyish get-up, suggesting that there is more to be found out about the Doctor once we peel back his protective layers, both literally and figuratively. The Fourth Doctor. Post-regeneration, the Fourth Doctor cycles through a couple more outlandish outfits. Before settling on the fedora and scarf, which is arguably the most iconic costume in British television history. It was decided that this Doctor would be more alien than previous incarnations. It's fairly well known that in leaning into the bohemian influences, that the original costume was inspired by Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec's lithograph poster Ambassadeurs Artistes Bourrantes. I do love Toulouse-Lautrec's work, so I think it's really cool that there's a link to Doctor Who there. I also have an obsession with Moulin Rouge, which features Toulouse-Lautrec as a character in it, and has another character, Satie, wear a scarf that is very much based on the Fourth Doctor's one. Show a picture of that scarf to anyone who's not watched the show, and they will probably be able to tell you that that's Doctor Who's scarf. There is a well-known story about how the scarf came to be such an incredible scarf. Costume designer James Aitchen, inspired by the image of Bourrante, wanted a scarf knitted. So he chose the wool colours that he wanted the scarf to be, handed them over to knitter Begonia Pope, and gave her no instructions on how long he wanted the scarf to be. She did something that I would probably do without explicit instruction and simply used all of the wool, resulting in the absurdly long scarf that Baker ended up wearing. James Aitchen said, "I went to Begonia and I said, look, start knitting, these are the colours, the repeats are here. I went back a week later and the scarf was 22 feet long. The actor who was playing Doctor Who was very tall. He sort of wrapped it around him and was like, yeah, this is great, we could use this. Tom Baker, the actor, thought he could use it as a prop, so it stuck. I think we shortened it a little bit though." The scarf went through a number of changes, with Tom Baker often asking for it to be made longer. At one point he suggested that the main scarf and the stunt scarf should be sewn together, which resulted in the long looping scarf of seasons 16 and 17.
I forgot to record a big section of script, so I'm gonna do it right now, and I hope the quality isn't awful. According to June Hudson, who did the redesign for Tom Baker's costume in 1980, the hat and scarf were the initial starting points for the costume, and she described the rest of the costuming process as so. I think the rest of his costume really came together in fittings at the costumier's Berman's. Often with a leading man or woman in a series, especially a fantasy series, that's the best approach. You just rummage until you find things that feel right to the actor. So, Tom's hat and scarf ended up being complemented with a cardigan, a bright red narrow wale corduroy shooting jacket with leather elbow patches, sagging tweed trousers, a crumpled scarf tie, and scuffed Oxfords. Tom looked very much like the eternal student, which is, of course, what his doctor in many ways represented. He had boundless curiosity and an unquenchable sense of wonder about the universe, and I think that's what children love about the character. So, this is taken from an article written by June Hudson on Tom Baker, the official site. I'm very thankful that June has written this because it contains so much detail and she's clearly very passionate about her work, which has been an absolute godsend whilst doing this research. So, June, if you ever see this, thank you so much. Anyway, the Doctor wears his red shooting jacket for the whole of the first season. But producer Philip Hinchcliffe then got to choose which jacket the Doctor would wear for each story. And we see examples of this in his big brown overcoat and then later his iconic frock coat in Pyramids of Mars, which was introduced by costume designer Barbara Kidd in order to move more towards a romantic look for the Doctor. And then his grey tweed jacket in The Android Invasion. There's also a switch from his initial diamond pattern cardigan to a checked waistcoat in the second season. There are even more changes to the outfit throughout the first 6 seasons of Tom Baker's run, but the core look of his costume does stay the same.
It is now the 1980s, so costume change. For Baker's last season, the task of redesigning his costume was given to June Hudson by new producer John Nathan Turner. Hudson was given full permission to completely remake the look of the Doctor, but she decided to stick with the basic premise of the original outfit, as she thought fans wouldn't like a complete overhaul of the costume. Hudson also felt that Tom Baker knew what worked for him, and as the focal point of the series, it was important that he remain in a costume that was right for him. However, Hudson still felt that she could design anything and that Tom would wear it well. In her article, she says that he told her, "He would wear anything she designed, even if it's a tent, darling." The first steps Hudson took in her design process was looking at new designs using the old costume's colours. She used John Singer Sargent portraits as inspiration, though she eventually decided that these designs weren't as distinctive and new as she'd been instructed to make. I'll just read out this quote from her about how she settled on the colour from the redesign, as I think reading about her design process in her own words is important and dead interesting. "I knew I wanted to choose something with nobility and a certain lightness. It couldn't be too jazzy, it had to be comfortable and down to earth, but at the same time the Doctor had to stand out amidst all the bizarre creatures he met, with their outlandish clothes, so the colour had to be powerful. White and black were out, they were too stark, and I anyway tend to reserve them for aliens, because they give you great silhouettes. Green would not have worked as it was used so often in jungle backgrounds and so on, and also as there is the association of little green men. Yellow would not have been right for Tom because, like pillowbox red or royal purple, it would have been too garish, whereas navy blue seemed to me too dull. In the end, I decided on a blue-red compromise, plum, which had both majesty and warmth. It is definitely a patrician hue. It was popular in England among bloods during the Regency, and later in last century it was often the colour for gentlemen's smoking jackets. The Doctor is at one level an honorary English gentleman, and Tom's version of the character had always suggested an adventurer of the Romantic Age, so when I came to rationalise my choice of colour, it seemed wholly justifiable. However, I felt also that plum was not so upper crust as to be aloof and off-putting. It is a comfortable shade, and it also has a certain quality of mystery and magic. She then had to figure out exactly what pieces of clothing to dress Tom in. She wanted to keep the scarf but decided that the colours needed changing in order to work well with the colour scheme that she'd decided on. So she made a new scarf in her chosen colours, this time making it out of chenille rather than wool, as chenille was lighter and would be more comfortable for Baker to wear under studio lights. She also decided fairly early on that she wanted him to have a long coat, and the final result was a calf-length, double-breasted plum overcoat with a half belt and big velvet collar, based mainly on a Russian cavalry coat from the time of the First World War, though with Regency overtones. Given Tom's sense of fun, I felt I couldn't have just a plain plum lining, so I found a lovely piece of green and black fabric in a shop on Oxford Street. The coat was manly, swashbuckling, heroic. To wear such a commanding outfit, you've got to be a commanding person, and Tom was one of the few actors I knew who has the necessary presence. It is important that a leading man's clothes, however subtly, do a great deal for him, and the best thing is to find garments that other people can't wear, to use the qualities which he has and others haven't. Tom was marvellous to design clothes for because he had such a strong, vibrant personality. He was never challenged by his clothes, so you could hit him hard without fear of him being swamped. One thing which John Nathan Turner asked Hudson to include was the question marks on the Doctor's collar, which Tom Baker infamously found insufferably vulgar and cheap. I don't mind the question marks, though I think if I was watching in the 1980s, then I wouldn't have liked them. Though I completely get why it feels like adding a superhero motif to a character that it just doesn't make sense for, and it was definitely a choice made for merchandising reasons. The Fifth Doctor. The Fourth Doctor regenerates both his face and his footwear when he becomes the Fifth Doctor, with his leather knee-high boots turning into shoes. There's no explanation for this in-universe or out-of-universe that I know of, though it's probably just that the boots didn't fit Peter Davidson, so he just wore shoes. The Fifth Doctor decides on his new look by entering a TARDIS room that appears to be dedicated to cricket. I love Doctor Who so much. This Doctor wears a beige frock coat, a V-neck cricket jumper, a white dress shirt with question marks embroidered on the lapel, striped trousers, and white high-top shoes. He also wears a stick of celery on his lapel. An in-universe explanation for this was eventually given towards the end of Davison's run, where the Doctor tells Perry that he is allergic to certain gases and that the celery will turn purple when it's in proximity. As for why the choice was made out of universe, it was producer John Nathan Turner's idea. In an interview with Doctor Who magazine in the 1980s, Davison said, "As far as the costume went, I came up with the cricketing motif simply because cricket is a game of which I'm very fond, and it seemed to suggest a good sort of profile. It fitted with our desire to make him young and a bit more physical in his approach, as well as being a nice link with the whole Earth ethos which the Doctor has always been so involved with. The celery was John's idea. He came to me one day and said, 'I think the new Doctor should wear a stick of celery on his lapel.' And so that was it. Funny, really, because I don't much like celery, and I usually ended up getting presented with tons of the stuff at conventions. It was nice that it was actually explained before I left the series." He later said, "At the first costume fitting, John Nathan Turner said I should have something odd and unique on the lapel, and he came to me a couple of weeks later and said, 'Stick a celery on your lapel.' I said, 'Okay, as long as you explain it,' and we proceeded to do 3 seasons, and I said, 'You still haven't explained the celery.' So they wrote this bit for my last story, The Caves of Androzani, that explained it as an antidote to a poison, which it also detected." The celery in this context does sort of feel like John Nathan Turner just picked something odd at random without actually thinking about how it fitted the character, and it resulted in poor Peter Davidson forever being gifted a vegetable that he didn't much like. These comments also suggest that Davison had enough input into the costume to suggest that a cricketing motif be the starting point for the design. It was June Hudson who did the preliminary designs for the Fifth Doctor's outfit, and she takes credit for putting him in cricket whites, though the costume design was eventually adapted by Colin Lavers to become the outfit that we would see on screen. The original brief from John Nathan Turner to Lavers indicated that the Doctor should wear a morning coat, striped trousers, and a collapsible top hat so that the Doctor could produce a cricket ball from time to time. Nathan Turner also requested that the question mark motif from the Fourth Doctor's design be retained and used for the Fifth's. Lavers didn't like either of the ideas suggested by John Nathan Turner. He then suggested the Doctor could wear an Edwardian cricket blazer, but Nathan Turner didn't like this as he thought that he would look too similar to Ford Prefect from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the TV version of which had aired in 1981. Lavers wanted to avoid a straightforward cricket outfit as the whiteness would have caused lighting issues and would have been near impossible to keep clean. So instead, his final design is inspired by a vintage cricket outfit. The jumper that they ended up going with was actually found in a shop that sold fashion items rather than sportswear. It was knitted from an off-white cotton, so was breathable and would look good under stage lighting. The frock coat and trousers were made by a theatrical tailor who specialised in period clothing. The shirts were made to Lavers' design by a theatrical bespoke shirt maker, who also made some shirts for pop stars, so there's a link back to Pertwee's outfit there. And the boots were bought from a shop so that they could be replaced quickly and easily when they needed to be. Peter Davison is a big fan of cricket, and when he was filming All Creatures Great and Small in Yorkshire, he played a charity cricket match in Hawes, which is in Wensleydale, and a picture of him from that match was seen by John Nathan Turner. According to an interview with Davison in The Cricketer, he wanted something youthful and eccentric for my costume, so that fitted the bill, although I am pretty sure it was my idea. As it happened, the costume didn't really look authentic, whereas I wanted something more off the peg. It was comfortable though. So Davison is fairly sure that he's the one who came up with the original idea. But we can say for sure that if it wasn't for Peter Davison's love of cricket, then the Fifth Doctor's outfit would probably have been very different. The Sixth Doctor. Leading into the Sixth Doctor's run took us into probably the most controversial era of costuming. Maybe I should look into the choices made for Perry in my next video. No actor should have to perform in a bikini in -5 degrees. The Sixth Doctor, of course, starts off his life in his previous incarnation's clothes, though there is an unnoticeable alteration in this outfit. According to Colin Baker, they had to split the outfit up the back so that he could fit into it. So keep that image in mind next time you watch The Twin Dilemma. When Colin Baker was cast as the Sixth Doctor, he had a good idea of the type of costume he wanted to wear. And this quote from him describes the design process quite well. I was asked what I'd like to wear, and I said I'd like something black, a bit austere, ruffled sleeves, long black coat, black trousers. They said, that's the master, really. So then John said, I think it should be really tasteless, and he kept coming up with these designs, and it's quite tricky for a designer because you want to do things that are tasteful. Poor Pat Godfrey kept coming up with design after design, and in the end this collection of clashing materials came together, and that was chosen. I never cared for it very much, but I was on the inside looking out. I didn't have to look at it. You did. The totally tasteless outfit consisted of a white shirt with question mark still on the collar, a patterned waistcoat, question mark braces, yellow trousers with black stripes, green ankle boots, orange spats, a colourful watch chain, and a very understated coat. This campy monstrosity was designed by Pat Godfrey, who designed many different outfits for the Sixth Doctor, but they kept getting rejected by John Nathan Turner for not being tasteless enough. Eventually, Godfrey came up with the design that we'd see on screen as a demonstration of how horrendous a truly tasteless outfit would look, in the hopes that John Nathan Turner would agree that it was a bad idea. He loved it and greenlit the design. The coat was made by theatrical tailors Arthur Davey of Covent Garden, London, and a total of 3 were made over the Sixth Doctor's run. The only part of the costume that Baker was able to choose for himself was the cap pin that he wears on his lapel. He said he chose this as a subtle reference to the quote by Rudyard Kipling, "I am the cat who walks by himself and all places are alike to me," as he felt that the Doctor was very similar to such a cat. The Sixth Doctor wears at least 7 different cat pins, with 2 of them being based on Baker's own cats, Eric and Weeble, and one even being the character of Marie from the Aristocats. Fans would also often send him cat badges, which he would make an effort to wear. When performing the Doctor Who stage show, Doctor Who The Ultimate Adventure, he wore a different brooch every night. The stage version of the Sixth Doctor also sported a redesigned version of his outfit, which, according to user Rob T. Firefly on an RPF forum, incorporated more blues and purples into the design, which wouldn't have been able to be used on TV due to blue screen effects. Unfortunately, there's not much information on that version of the outfit, as there weren't many official images of it released. But the forum post that I mentioned has a breakdown of it and goes into as much detail as possible on the redesigned outfit. Another fun little detail in Baker's main outfit is that just inside the yellow lapel are a series of felt cat silhouettes, with one being added for each story that Baker completed. So there are no cats during the Twin Dilemma, one during Attack of the Cybermen, and then this keeps going until there are 6 during Revelation of the Daleks. They disappear during Trial of a Time Lord, but as a cat person myself, I really appreciate this little detail. I also just want to draw attention to the lining of the coat, because I think it's a great choice of fabric that doesn't really get seen very often. So this outfit was not particularly well received by the public during the 1980s, but the show was suffering from various production issues at the time, and I do think maybe if those issues hadn't existed, then the outfit might have grown on people a little bit more. Nowadays, there does seem to be a more positive view of the outfit choice, and people have done a lot of different redesigns trying to keep the vibe of the original whilst making it a little bit less 80s. The Sixth Doctor has had a blue redesign in various comics and audios, and June Hudson has done some redesigns as well that I think look really great. I really like her concept for a black version of the outfit that would supposedly have been worn post Trial of a Time Lord. She's done redesigns for quite a lot of the Doctors actually, and I think most of them come from her time teaching at the University of Redlands. Her website does have to be accessed through the Wayback Machine, so it can be harder to find some of her stuff. There's also one of the initial rejected designs that Pat Godfrey did that I think works quite well as a sort of more tasteful take on the multicoloured coat. Personally, I kind of love tasteless fashion, and I do understand where Nathan Turner was coming from with the idea of making the Doctor more obviously alien, but I also understand why it didn't go down particularly well with viewers and why it's become an infamous costuming choice, with countless debates happening over whether it was an incredible or horrific take on the Doctor's outfit. It clearly didn't serve Baker's performance well, and one of the most important jobs of costume design is to enhance an actor's performance and to create a costume that works well with both the actor and the character that they're portraying. It's also worth noting that dressing the Doctor in such bright colours affected other areas of the show. The lighting and set elements had to be lit and coloured in a way that would ensure a balance of luminance in the video image. This means that some set pieces just aren't lit as well as they could have been if Baker had been dressed in less bright colours. I will finish this section of the video with Hawaiian shirt lover John Nathan Turner's thoughts on the costume. There were some complaints about the costume and it's nonsense. It was nonsense then and it's nonsense now. Colin's costume is fine for the Doctor. He's not human like one of us. He's an alien. He's a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, and so he's bound to have different customs and different outlooks, and so it seemed logical to make it a bad taste costume. Bad taste in our opinion, but not in his. I always liked wearing Hawaiian shirts, and Hawaiian shirts are very colourful, and I always felt that people took you very well, that they assumed you were a warm, friendly, funny, likeable, approachable sort of person if you were wearing a Hawaiian shirt, because of the bright colours and the patterns and so forth. So when it came to designing a costume for Colin Baker, I thought, why not make it a Hawaiian shirt, but make it Edwardian, like the other Doctors wore, like Tom Baker or John Pertwee would have worn. Sort of Tom Baker meets the Hawaiian shirt. So we decided on a multicoloured motif. It stretched to the opening title sequence as well. We took the Peter Davison title sequence and added streams of multicolours, just like on my favourite Hawaiian shirts. I thought it looked terribly nice. I do think that this quote makes it quite clear that for better or for worse, John Nathan Turner had quite a big influence over the design of the show at this point in time. Perhaps more influence than previous producers had done. The Seventh Doctor. After regenerating from Sylvester McCoy in a wig to Sylvester McCoy without a wig, and then getting 2 women mixed up, the Seventh Doctor heads back to the TARDIS to choose his new look. He tries on some of his previous incarnations' outfits, namely the 4th and the 5th, and then reveals his question mark adorned jumper from underneath the Second Doctor's fur coat. The Seventh Doctor wears what a lot of sources refer to as a safari jacket, though Mark Francis of Great British Sewing Bee fame says that it's a Norfolk jacket style which designer Ken True added bellow pockets to. He wears a tartan or paisley scarf under the lapels with a matching handkerchief in his pocket, a white shirt, a paisley tie, a knitted pullover with an 80s colour palette of question marks, high-waisted tweed plaid trousers, brogued spectator shoes, a Panama hat, and a question mark umbrella. In the first shot of the outfit, he's wearing his braces over the jumper, though I don't think he made a habit of this and they were usually underneath. So, what were the influences in this design? Ken True, who designed the outfit, had been working on Doctor Who costumes since 1965, where he was an assistant in the costume department, so he had plenty of experience. The brief that he had to work with was something that looked ordinary from a distance but more peculiar once you got up close. But all that was given in the original script was that the new Doctor would be wearing a waistcoat and sneakers. McCoy was known as a comedy actor when he first took on the role, and the costume does reflect the more whimsical elements that he brought to his first few outings as the Doctor, with the hat and umbrella being able to be used as props for physical comedy, reminiscent, I suppose, of the look that Charlie Chaplin was associated with. The design also had 1930s influences, with boxy jackets being popular in both the 30s and the 80s, and the jumper is based on a 1930s golfing jumper. McCoy has said that he wasn't a fan of the question marks on the jumper, saying in a 2019 interview with The Guardian, "I thought it was overstated, but the producer wanted it. I think his granny knitted them. If we'd done a fourth season, I would have got rid of it, because by then I had the muscle." However, he reportedly loved the pockets in the jacket as he could carry his script in them. In the same interview, McCoy said, "Someone once asked me what advice I would give a new Doctor, and I said, don't wear what you really like to wear. For years, I couldn't go out in a hat." When the casting of the Seventh Doctor was revealed in 1986, McCoy was asked by a reporter whether he would be wearing the straw hat that he was currently wearing as the Doctor. McCoy was given the nod by Nathan Turner, so he answered that yes, he would be. He also said in a 1988 interview that the costume had been mistaken for his personal street style. "I was walking back to the base in costume, and on the way there I was stopped by an interviewer for the clothes show. He said, 'Now you've become a celebrity, Sylvester, does this allow you the luxury and the money to be able to dress as you do?' He thought my costume was my everyday wear." He then added, "I was quite pleased with the costume because I wanted one that was slightly odd. I'd miss the umbrella if it went because I invented that, but I think the scarf could be darker, and the hatband too. Perhaps the jacket could be brown. I'd like to change it, but not dramatically." Guess what happened in the 1989 season? The Seventh Doctor's character had been becoming darker and more manipulative as the series went on, and in his third season he was given a darker redesign of the costume, with a darker jacket, trousers, tie and hatband. The costume was originally meant to be revealed in The Curse of Fenric, but with the spooky setting of this serial it was moved to October, and instead Battlefield became the opener for season 26. So the new outfit is seen in Battlefield and Ghostlight, and then in The Curse of Fenric the Doctor wears a duffel coat to conceal the new outfit, taking it off further into the story to reveal the revamped look that we've already seen. So it's a shame that reveal was lost. The costuming choice was clearly a reaction to the reaction of the Sixth Doctor's outfit, and I think in general it worked well, though Nathan Turner was still insistent upon those question marks. I do have a soft spot for the question mark jumper, but I also think that the question mark motif felt a little forced at this point. There is one more outfit to mention here, the one worn by McCoy in the Doctor Who movie. This one gets rid of the question marks, and instead the Doctor sports a red brocade waistcoat, a darker tie, and his jacket is now a light brown tweed. This outfit isn't on screen for long, in fact it's torn to shreds by bullets. But I think this was a nice addition to McCoy's wardrobe by costume designer Jory Woodman. It's a more toned down version of the original, suiting a more minimal 90s aesthetic, as well as suiting a slightly older version of the Seventh Doctor. The Eighth Doctor. It's the 90s now. Sorry if you can hear a little creature munching away, that is my cat. Now, when it comes to the Eighth Doctor, calling what he wears a costume is probably more accurate than it is for any other incarnation, since in universe the Eighth Doctor is quite literally in fancy dress. This Doctor regenerates just before a fancy dress party and once again steals his look from a hospital. The outfit that he takes is supposedly a Wild Bill Hickok costume, though it's giving more Victorian gentleman than it is Wild West gunslinger. The Doctor's frock coat is green velvet. He has a wingtip collar shirt, a grey cravat, a double-breasted waistcoat, high-waist trousers and black slip-on dress shoes. He also has lovely long curly hair, which was, out of universe, a wig. Of the wig, McGann said,
"Played this sort of soldier boy a few weeks before and had this real short haircut. And when I turned up on the Doctor Who set, I literally had this almost a skinhead haircut. This is great. This will be a departure. They'll like this." They freaked. and made me wear this wig out of a box, you know, like some thing. Horrible.
The Eighth Doctor's costume was designed by Jory Woodman, and she had a huge job when it came to redesigning the Doctor for a new audience. Ultimately, the costume team went for a look heavily inspired by previous Doctors, with echoes of the first and fourth Doctor's costumes present. According to fanzine Envision, it was originally suggested that the Doctor should be modelled after Abraham Lincoln. Woodman liked the idea of a dark outfit, but felt a Lincoln image would be too sombre. Many past Doctors had worn long coats that presented a dashing image whenever a breeze caught them while striding around on location. It was a silhouette Woodman wanted to keep. Wanting to imbue an American quality, she latched onto a second suggestion, that he should look like Wild Bill Hickok. From this notion came the idea of brown as a base colour, a medium brown for the trousers, pale brown for the Western-style double-breasted scoop-necked waistcoat, and two-tone silk for a very broad cravat worn around a wing-collared shirt and fastened with a tie-pin. A fob watch strung along with director Jeffrey Sachs's wish to see time being represented as an icon throughout the movie. McGann's deep brown velvet coat was a departure from Hickok, looking more Regency England than Frontier California. It was tailored specifically to fit the actor, with slightly broader shoulders contrasting with a taken-in waistline to accentuate his outline. The quote describes the jacket as brown, and there was some debate over the colour of it due to the way that velvet appears under different lighting, but I'm pretty sure the modern consensus is that it's green. Paul McGann had a couple of other costumes during his run. Jumping forward in time, I would like to briefly mention his dark eyes look from his audio adventures, which McGann had a lot more influence on, and seems inspired by the Ninth Doctor's look, particularly the black peacoat. He also had a messenger bag as part of the costume, and the jeans and t-shirt were McGann's own. I don't think the jeans and t-shirt were supposed to be part of the costume, but they have been incorporated into the audio drama covers. I'm also not sure if the costume was all McGann's idea, if he worked with a designer on it, where the coat and the bag came from. So if you have any information on that, then please do leave it in the comments below. The Eighth Doctor's other notable look is one from the mini-episode Night of the Doctor. This costume was designed by Howard Burden and is based on the one from the TV movie. This look clearly shows the Doctor in the middle of the Time War, and there's a post-apocalyptic feel to it, which is echoed in the World War I leather gaiters that he wears. His shoes are also US cavalry boots, which is very in keeping with the idea of the Doctor as a warrior now. Whilst the Eighth Doctor's original look was that of a Victorian Edwardian gentleman, this one has the feel of an Edwardian adventurer to it, replacing the velvet frock coat with a moleskin one, and his long curly hair with a shorter, more practical cut. So I am going to be leaving this video here for today. Hopefully I'll get a part 2 with all the post-2005 Doctors done soon, but this was taking quite long, so I thought I'd split it. I might look at a different topic next and then do a part 2 another time. I did play through the entirety of the Mass Effect trilogy whilst I was writing this, which is maybe one of the reasons why it took so long. But yeah, maybe I'll look at those decade-old games at some point. I am also like midway through a Baldur's Gate playthrough, so the chances of me doing literally anything else at the moment are very, very low. Anyway, I mentioned as many costume designers and contributors as I could find out about, but if you know the names of anyone else who's worked on costume design, who had influences on it, please do drop their names in the comments. I really want people to get credit for their work. If there's any details I missed, or if you've got a favourite costume variant that I didn't mention, again, also put it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, hopefully you did if you made it to the end, then maybe consider buying me a coffee on Ko-Fi. You don't have to do that, but it's there. Oh, and I also now have a Tumblr account for this channel, so I'll leave the link in the description as well. Other than that, thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll have something else written and filmed within the next 6 months, hopefully sooner. Bye!